Let me step back about a decade before Tom Cruise kept me up a lot at night. So I don't know when my fascination with data and information and making sense of things started, but I suspect it was when I was really small. And that's because my parents said that I used to bug them by asking questions all the time. But why? But how? But why? But how? So when I grew up, it was fairly obvious to me that what I wanted to do was to do something around taking information and making sense of it in some way. So for a long time, that's what I did. You know, all this information in, turn it into some insight, a strategy, a report, look at a sector, technology, healthcare, information technology, finance. And so, you know, I had a lot of fulfillment and enjoyment from what I was doing, and a deep relationship with data and the power of that insight, particularly with organizations. And then I went to the movies.
A road diverges in the desert. Lexus. The road you're on, John Anderton, is the one less traveled. Make sure you
Good evening. You can move the old-fashioned.
John Anderton.
21 stands provides gourmet cuisine. John Anderton. You can use a Guinness right about now.
Stressed out, John Anderton?
Escape from it all, Harrison. Get away, John Anderton. Forget your troubles. Let's go, John Anderton.
He's been identified on the metro. The train makes 2 stops at 20th and 33rd.
Send units to each location.
Never make 20th.
Spoiler alert, he was innocent. And I'm sitting in the cinema and I'm looking ahead to the future and I'm thinking, is that what my life is going to look like? And the anarchist in me is thinking, what happens if my data is used out of context? What if it's misunderstood? What if I'm walking through a mall and all of a sudden I have Guinness and Lexus and American Express screaming at me for an offer? You know, does that mean that my life now is this constant bombardment of information? And so from a technology and an entrepreneurial point of view, this was the thing that was keeping me awake, like constantly for a decade. And so at that time, there was the rise of the Facebook, social networks. And what occurred to me was that as we were moving with a lot of excitement into this whole sharing economy, and there was the rise of big data, that fairly soon we'd get to a point where we would start to see the value of small data, which is what we believe big insights can come from. And that was really the inspiration for me for Meeco and what we're calling the Me Economy, MeCommerce platform, a life management platform which could essentially act as a way of managing all of the data and information in your life, but permissioned by you. So when we started out on this journey, people were saying, well, what is it? Is it a B2B business model? Is it a C2B? Is it a B2C? And as we started to work through things, particularly now as we start to see the rise of the Internet of Things, personal tracking devices, we realized pretty quickly that the model is actually human to planet. We've come to a point literally where data, the planet, is really breathing in and out data every day in everything we do. You know, there are so many devices, wearables, new technology that is integral and integrated in our life. And so what we realized was if we were going to have this going on all of the time, we needed some way to be actually able to make sense of it. Put on top of that, the surveillance economy, which we've talked about. You heard, for those of you that were at the launch last night and through the talks this morning, the realization that we understand our governments, our telecommunications providers, our favorite brands actually are tracking us. And we know that the data broking industry is like a $1+ plus trillion business. And in fact, I think when we were in London, Liz Brandt, who runs a consulting business, Control Shift, they've started to try and quantify the value of that in the European market. And what they're saying is it's very difficult because so much of that value is actually hidden and hasn't been released. So I think it's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what the value of that data tracking market is. So as I said, this idea that the planet is literally breathing in and out data. One of the things with the idea of being empowered to manage our own data, I think there are these 4 byproducts, and the first we haven't even started to talk about or see addressed, and that is the impact on planet. So the 4 areas are planet, people, purpose, and profit. The planet aspect, when you think about the amount of big data that is saved in these huge data farms that are all around the world, the amount of electricity that generates, and how much of that data is actually redundant. If we take it back just to that one simple use case, which is change of address, the number of organizations, governments, institutions that are handling that one identifier over and over and over. So if there is one environmental reason for us to start being empowered around our data, it's first of all to start looking at how we can minimize that environmental footprint. The people thing, it's the sovereignty argument. I know what my name is, I know where I live. There are some unique things about my life which are permanent, my date of birth. There are things that change, my address. And so I can be trusted as a reliable source. And so one of the things that we really want to achieve through Meeco and the idea of these life management platforms is that you very, very quickly become the most reliable source of data and information. The idea of purpose, you've heard Drummond and Doc talk about centralized networks, and this is not to take anything away from the power of those social networks. I mean, I love Twitter, it's a very effective tool, but one of the things that I see is that it locks down the amount of innovation. And if we start to think that we would have the same capability as individuals that organizations have, and we could actually scale our own data in the same way that organizations do, then there is a really exciting time ahead in terms of purpose and opportunity and innovation. And last but not least, profit. I believe at the moment there is a really uneven distribution of wealth, and it's not to say that, you know, it's all one-sided with business and therefore it's against the individual. This idea of an emerging sharing economy, I think, also is one of the exciting things that comes with the data empowerment movement, because there's this whole heap of value in the middle which we're not exploring. So there's what's mine, there's what's yours, and then there's this sweet spot in the middle which is ours. And around that whole sharing, I believe that we can take significant cost out from organizations, really significant cost, and therefore it makes sense if that dialogue is direct, that actually starts to flow back to individuals. So where does this all start? Why this idea of a life management platform? So one of the ways that we can actually start to alter the way that data is used and the way that people are tracked is starting here with this beautiful pregnant woman. So at the moment in the United States, the average digital birth of a child is around 6 weeks. It's actually getting closer and closer to physical birth, and there's also a trend for pre-birth because people are sharing a lot of information about an unborn child. So what we see is that very, very quickly it's announced on a social network, date of birth, name, place of birth. There you have everything for a data broker to start tracking an individual. You add to that now some really smart technology in the area of wearables, so smart nappies that do urine analysis to tell you whether there is a spike in temperature. You have some really cool technology that's just come out recently to help with detecting SIDS, cot deaths, in terms of monitoring baby vitals. So there are lots of things where you would argue, wow, that's great. If you're a new parent, maybe you would want that insight. It would be valuable. But the question is, who owns that? And where is it shared? And how is it permissioned? So the next thing is child's getting a little older. They are starting to use maybe more sophisticated wearables, maybe tracking their health, their well-being, what they're eating. And so very quickly we fast forward to a point where we've very quickly become the product. And this is really one of the issues that we want to reverse and take it back to a time where we don't have to trade off the difference between innovation and insight and opportunity and giving up our sovereign self along the way. So, how do we do that? Where do we start? This is what's been keeping me awake at night. We see there are 4 key ways that we are participating, willingly or unwillingly, in the surveillance economy at the moment. So the first is our identity. It's the story of our life. You know, my name, address, where I live, whether I have children, whether I have a cat, whether I, it's the stuff that makes me a unique segment of one. Then there is my browser habits. Am I Googling something because I'm actually interested in it, or am I Googling it because someone mentioned something to me and the context is needed? And if you want to understand a little bit about some of those scenarios, I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, the film Terms and Conditions May Apply, because one of the journalists actually started Googling a whole host of things that he shouldn't, waiting for the authorities to turn up and knock on his door. And they did pretty quickly, because he was Googling, how do I kill my wife? So again, context. He was a journalist, he was researching, and fairly soon he was followed up by the authorities. So context is really, really important. The next thing is preferences. We all have preferences. They start when we're really young. I look at my goddaughter, my nephew, my niece, and I'm amazed already, when they're 5 or 6 years old, how clearly that they have preferences. And those things become also part of our identity. We carry them into the future. Last but not least, intentions. And this is really where docs work. Inspired and excited me. So here I was working on something that I thought was a problem that really bothered me, that I wanted to do something about. And then I read the intention economy, and all of a sudden there's a movement around this. There is thought leadership where people recognize that the opportunity to wake up in the morning and say, I want a product, I want advice, I want an experience. I want to do that with a brand that I trust, or a service provider that I am happy to engage with. And so this idea that I could actually cast an intention and really enter into a direct dialogue with an organization or a service provider or a trusted entity or even my government, the opportunity for us to move away from that targeting model. I think this is part of what's really exciting about the emergence of life management platforms and the ability for us to actually cast an intention, as opposed to the idea that someone is guessing what it is that we want to do next. And I'll talk to the power of that in a moment. So we, as Annalise shared, we went live with Meeco last night. So today is one of the most terrifying days of my life. Derek, who's up next, our CTO, he's going to take you through a practical demonstration and kind of show you exactly how the applications work. So just very, very quickly, in the context more of not so much Meeco, but life management platforms, because we see that there'll be lots of these solutions that emerge. Kupinger Cole, an analyst firm in Germany, wrote a white paper a few years ago which predicted that 2014, 2015 would be the years where we would start to see the emergence of life management platforms, where people would be able to permission data. The 2 areas most important, health and wealth management. Why? Yeah, we're happy to participate in social networks, but I don't see so many people wanting to put their bank account and their health data out for everyone to see. So the idea with Meeco is, let's look at those 4 areas where the surveillance economy operates right now, and then let's look at how you could be empowered to start doing those analytics. And I know there was a question about analytics. So the first thing is connecting across multiple devices, one single account. Designed to be mobile. Part of the reason why I couldn't execute Meeco even 2 or 3 years ago was that we realized that personal cloud computing and the idea of something being ubiquitous at hand, we weren't quite there from a technology point of view. Everything was starting to converge, but it needed to get to a point where, oh, I love those shoes, photograph, I want somebody to respond. There was still a way to go. And I think the exciting thing about where we're at right now is the fusion of what we've seen through Pinterest and social sharing. We now take that one step further into what we call the me economy or MeCommerce. Let's bring that choice closer to me. My life, a way of managing the uniqueness of my life, information about me. And as I said, Derek's going to take you through all of these. My sites, browser history. So the important thing here is not that you can't transact every day, but that you can start to transact in a discrete way and you become the tracker. So you have that insight and you start to build out a data blockchain over the course of your habits and your life. Of course, you still need to permission things. If I'm booking an airline ticket, I want to make sure that that's a good experience. I understand that there may be cookies. There are things that make that session successful for both parts of the transaction, but I can also, when using Meeco, check out what those cookies are and decide to delete things that are tracking analytics that may not be essential to the transaction. My intentions, this is the exciting bit. I think this is where we'll start to see a major step change. The ability for us to say, I do want something and I'm already targeted into a brand. And so there are some things in my life right now that I know absolutely I'm going to do in the next month, week, year. You know, I'm going to replace my phone. I'm going to get a new mobile contract. I must do my will. So there are a list of things that I know that I want to and need to do. And there are already some brands and organizations or service providers where there is enough trust or aspiration that I would be really willing to have a dialogue directly with. And so I think this area that Doc has been talking about, this is where we're going to see enormous innovation. And I think the exciting thing when Katryna talks this afternoon around working with organizations, it's how do organizations be enabled to understand these preferences so those two things come together. And that I think is a really exciting part of where these two worlds come together. My brands, really simple within our application. I use the brand, I don't. I like them, I don't. And then it starts to sort those brands. And then out of that, Meeco is designed as a platform for other application builders to build out on. You can obviously do some profiling analytics. It's the sort of thing that Flamingo could take those brand preferences, take them back into an organization, and then start to say, okay, instead of investing in big data, invest in real data, do your analytics, but do your analytics real time with real preferences for real customers. And then my insights. The important thing is if you're using those 4 applications, what we wanted to achieve was a way of pulling all of the discrete data together into some graphical representation. So like a quantified self, you could start to understand more about yourself, but more importantly, this blockchain. Now, the thing that excites me about this, and when I look out into the future, is this idea that a child is born and is able to control and permission this series of events over the course of their life, and then actually can mine that chain of data over and over. And, you know, if you're 25 and you're trying to apply for a new job, it might be that you're pulling something that you did when you're 12 years of age and you're 18, and then you may reuse that again in your 40s. And so the idea that we'll be able to mash up our own data and life hack, I think, is a really, really exciting opportunity that life management platforms are going to enable. So the magic formula and what we believe is the tipping point and can start to change things is this idea that data is most powerful when it's accurate, it's in context, it's time-bound, and it's matched with intention. And I think if we start to realize that we can take control of all of those things, that so much of the surveillance economy is guessing or trying to anticipate what we want. Imagine if we start to control those 4 factors, the cost that takes out for organizations, institutions, governments, the ability for us to be able to permission information down to really, really discrete blocks, and then for us to be able to wrap around that our intention. In the next 6 weeks, I am going to purchase a car. I've narrowed it down to 2 German manufacturers. It's either going to be this or this. I'm open to an experience. And one of the things that Doc talks about a lot is this ownership cycle. We invest so much in the sales cycle, that one moment where we're trying to influence a purchase. But I've owned my car for a lot longer than that experience in the showroom. And so what I would love is to permission in experience content over the ownership of that car. And then when I'm finished with that car, I might want to pass on some of that experience content to the next owner. And again, the Internet of Things, we've only just started to see the value that can come out of data sharing in that way. Fred Wilson, I was really inspired by this talk that he did at Le Web in France. I think it was towards last December. Actually, Drummond first shared it with me. I think we've got it posted on our blog, or you could Google it really easily. What he was talking about was the emergence of a Bitcoin-like protocol that would allow us to do the same things, but with full control over our identity, privacy, and data. So when I first imagined Meeco and we built out the prototype and we were almost ready to hit the go live button, and I said to the team, you know, there's something that's missing for me here, and this is a bit of a leap of faith, but what I'd like to do is jump on an airplane and go for a bit of a wander and see who in the world might be doing something that is going to strengthen what it is that we have as from an individual interface point of view. And as Drummond shared, that ended up twist of fate through Doc and Doc's wife Joyce, getting introduced to Drummond, which was off the back of something that had happened at Amplify. And so all of a sudden these things all came together. And what I realized was this business, legal, and technical infrastructure, like this super highway. And I was very committed to the idea that we wanted to help people own and manage and control their data, but we didn't want to store it. We didn't want to be the custodians of it. We wanted to find this neutral way where people could feel like they had all the ownership and the control, but that wasn't because Meeco was a silo. And so part of the reason why we've launched now ahead of Respect Connect is to get the people using our applications over the next few months to understand where we may enhance, what are the use cases, so that by the time Respect Connect comes along and the cloud service providers are up and running, we've got a lot of feedback in terms of how to build out further those applications. But what I think is really important and the thing for us to watch is this idea of data actually starting to become a currency in its own right. So I'll circle back to that in a second. The idea of this disruption and the shift, the idea of human to planet, data being the new currency, is, I could be wrong, but when I look into the future and I imagine people having sovereignty over the data in their life and building out this blockchain, then it seems that protocols like Bitcoin are really paving the way for what could be, in my opinion, a self-issued currency. Now, I know we're a way off that, and I know that's not the starting point for now, but I can see already in my lifetime the amount of significant change that has happened in terms of currency, the breakdown of barriers from a trade point of view. So when you start to look at what's happening here in that context and you model that out in terms of possibility, and you think about somebody having data as insight and the ability for them to exchange that and create reciprocity with organizations, with government, with institutions, I think we've got some really exciting times ahead. So the disruption, the shift, one, eliminating surveillance. Doc said at the talk in London, you know, will we see that in 5 years? Will we see that in 10 years? My sense is we're going to see things get a little bit darker before the light, because we're at the end of a very well entrenched and established set of business models. So I think what we'll see is potentially more of a push towards surveillance in some areas. This idea of creating a virtual currency, it's interesting. I know one of the banks in Australia has said if people have a Bitcoin account, they can't have a business account, whereas I've seen some of the banks in, say, the Nordic countries have a completely different attitude to it. When I was in London, I met a guy that's been asked on behalf of the Swedish government to work out an intergenerational data strategy for Nordic countries, and to start looking at how they can pull back some of that data into the countries that are participating for their future generations. Raising the tailored experience, that's something Katryna's going to talk about. Organisations need to understand the individual. They need to understand what's different. They need to understand the context of that. That's what's exciting. And the cost management in that, again, I think we haven't even started to explore. And then reducing the cost of transactions as a result of that, not just to the organisation, but also to the individual. The amount of time that we spend on the phone to call centres, explaining the same thing over and over, or trying to validate who we are. So there are so many simple things that I see enabled by this, and there are great leaps in terms of innovation. When we start to look at the Internet of Things, connected everything, the idea that my car will talk to me, my washing machine will talk to me, my shoes will talk to me, my refrigerator will dob on me when I take chocolate out of it at 3 o'clock in the morning. So there are some things that I'm happy for people to know. I look at my Jawbone Up. I'm very happy for my insurance company to know what my activity level during the day is. But I might not be so happy for them to see what my sleeping habits are. So we need transparency around the Internet of Things. You know, if you have a thermostat that can turn itself on and off because you're on holidays, where is that data going? You know, if a nappy is reporting back, is it reporting back to a medical insurance company? Or is it reporting back to the parents, first of all, to draw insight and then decide how that's going to be shared? So I see there's also going to be an opportunity from a legal point of view for there to be some specialty around interpreting terms and conditions, permission sharing. We haven't even started to see that whole area of interpretation start to unfold. So if the future is about exchanging data as insight, and data ownership is the new paradigm, and data actually becomes an accepted form of currency, then I personally believe that MeCommerce or the me economy is the starting point to that. Obviously, business needs to see value. We get that. But I think it actually starts with us. It starts with each of us in the room. It starts with us as parents. It starts with us understanding that the way we protect and help our children permission the data in their life is exactly the same as the way my parents taught me to put those coins in that little CBA tin. You know, as a kid, just the joy of dropping those coins in and thinking, hey, I'm saving. So if we can start to teach children the same kinds of things around data and value it and understand the value they may extract from that, then I think that's going to be where the new forms of saving are going to be focused. So if I go back to Tom Cruise keeping me awake, go back 10 years, the idea of what that looked like, a future where anyone could just call out to me and try and get my attention, it brings me full circle to what we wanted to create with Meeco. And this is the response to John Anderton walking through the mall.